All right, let's dive into an absolutely wild story of Cold War espionage. This is a game of smoke and mirrors, where the stakes, and I'm not exaggerating here, were the fate of the entire world.
So picture this, it's the late 1960s, and US intelligence is staring down the barrel of a terrifying new threat from the Soviet Union. A nuclear weapon they were pretty sure existed, but they just could not find.
And the threat here was, well, it was staggering. We're talking about a single one of these so-called ghost trains carrying a nuclear punch with 900 times the destructive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 900. So this was the billion-dollar question for American intelligence. I mean, think about it. The Soviet Union is just massive, with thousands of trains crisscrossing it every single day. Finding the one with nuclear missiles, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. And the answer would lead the CIA down a rabbit hole into one of the most elaborate deceptions in the history of spying.
Okay, so before we get into the spy games, you first have to understand the weapon at the heart of all this, the BZHRK Molodets. So its official name was the Combat Railway Missile Complex. But really, in simple terms, it was a train. And it looked just like any other freight train you'd see, except this one was designed to carry and launch nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles. It was the ultimate weapon for a second strike.
And this thing was an absolute masterpiece of military engineering and disguise. You had 17 cars in the train, but only 3 of them actually held missiles, and they were perfectly camouflaged to look like refrigerated cars. But the truly ingenious part was the launch system. It used this mortar-style ejection that basically popped the missile out of the car before its main engines fired up. Why? So the train itself wouldn't get completely obliterated in the launch. Smart, right?
So you can imagine, the very idea of this undetectable mobile nuclear threat sent absolute shockwaves to the CIA. It kicked off this desperate, years-long hunt for any little scrap of information they could possibly get their hands on.
And their problem was just immense. They tried everything. Spy satellites were useless. They couldn't tell a nuclear train from a regular freight train. At one point in 1982, they even sent a specially equipped Japanese train across the entire Soviet Union, packed with surveillance gear. But Soviet counterintelligence was all over it. The only real option left was to get someone on the inside.
So the CIA put all its energy into recruitment. They started targeting employees who worked at secret defense plants, a lot of which were in these closed cities. I mean, places that literally weren't on any public maps. But they just kept hitting a brick wall. Soviet counterintelligence was just too good.
And then, in the spring of 1969, a breakthrough. Or, well, what looked like a breakthrough. An engineer from a top-secret defense plant in the closed city of Perm just seemed to fall right into their laps.
I mean, for the Americans, this was a total dream come true. A guy named Viktor Buterin leaves a note saying he has state secrets. A quick check, and yup, he works at a plant that builds missile engine components. And here's the kicker. They also find out he has a relative, a guy named Kolesnikov, in a super high-ranking spot at the Ministry of Transport, the one ministry that would know the train's routes.
The connection was made on June 21st, 1969. A CIA officer, Frank Smith, walks up to Buterin and they do the whole code phrase exchange, straight out of a movie. "Where can one see the film Eugene Onegin?" Smith asks, and Buterin replies, "Onegin is best listened to at the Bolshoi Theater." And with that, the game was on.
The way they communicated was just pure, classic Cold War spycraft. Buterin would draw a little chalk mark on a wall as a signal. The CIA would then go leave a container in a park with money, questions, and equipment. They even gave him invisible ink so he could write his reports on the back of ordinary tourist postcards.
So the CIA, they're feeling pretty good. They think they have their man, and they even think they have the perfect leverage on him. They start digging through these old, captured Nazi archives, and what do they find? A file showing Buterin had been recruited by German intelligence during World War II. So they figured, he's a former traitor, and now he's selling secrets because he's terrified of being exposed. They thought he was compromised. But they missed one tiny, crucial detail from that 25-year-old file.
Yeah, Viktor Buterin wasn't a defector. He wasn't scared of anything. He was the bait. He was a loyal Soviet intelligence officer, and this entire operation was an incredibly elaborate game put together by a master of deception, KGB Major General Grigory Grigorenko.
And this whole deception, which was codenamed Zagadka, or riddle, this wasn't some new playbook they just came up with. No, This was the brilliant continuation of a game that had actually started way back in the middle of the Second World War.
See, back in 1943, after being captured by the Nazis, Butryn agreed to work for them. But in reality, he was working for SMERSH, Soviet counterintelligence. As a double agent, he fed the Nazi high command a ton of false information about Soviet troop movements, and he actually convinced them the Red Army's main offensive in 1944 was going to be in the south. It wasn't.
And this is where the pure genius of the KGB's plan comes in. They knew the CIA had those old Nazi files. They knew the Americans would find Butryn's name and think they'd uncovered his dirty little secret. The very piece of evidence the CIA used to trust him was the bait for a trap that was set decades in advance. Just incredible.
So, with the hook set and the trap sprung, the KGB, using Butryn as their mouthpiece, spent the next decade masterfully feeding the CIA this carefully crafted mix of truth, half-truths, and just outright fiction about the nuclear train program.
Butryn fed the CIA a steady stream of disinformation. He'd confirm real technical problems they were having, but then he'd exaggerate them, making them sound impossible to solve. He sent them looking for secret facilities way out in Siberia, while the real work was actually happening in Ukraine. For more than a decade, he totally convinced America the whole project was years and years behind schedule, even as it was moving full steam ahead.
By the mid-70s, the KGB decided it was time to end the first phase of the game. But they weren't just going to let it fizzle out. No, they planned a grand finale, something specifically designed to cement the deception and publicly humiliate the CIA.
So first, they very publicly arrested CIA handler Frank Smith during a dead drop and kicked him out of the country. Then, a tiny article appeared in a small newspaper mentioning some unnamed citizen had been jailed for treason. The CIA, of course, concluded it had to be Butryn and that he was now a martyr for their cause. And that paved the way for his fictional relative, Kolesnikov, to step in and keep the game going.
And the final sting came in 1983. The fake agent Kolesnikov claimed that Butryn had finally been released from prison and needed compensation for his trouble. So the CIA sent an agent to deliver 300,000 rubles, an absolutely astronomical sum of money back then. And of course, that agent was caught red-handed, giving the Soviets public proof that the CIA had fallen for this whole elaborate story for over a decade.
In the end, the real ghost trains finally entered service in 1987, patrolling the Soviet rail lines, totally undetectable, just like they were designed to be. Operation Zagadka really stands as this stunning reminder that in the world of intelligence, the most convincing truth can often be the most elaborate, patiently constructed lie.